Hey everybody, Jam Creates here. Got another video for you. Gonna have another little fun comic book discussion. Another one of those topics that I remember getting into. I wouldn't say heated arguments, but we'd have disagreements. We'd have conversations about this kind of stuff all the time when I was growing up. So today's topic is setting your comic in the real world. And the difference between, and what that means, and is it better to set your comic in the real world, or is it better to have it set in a fictional city or something along those lines, or in a completely different world? There's definitely pluses and minuses to both. I mean, the obvious thing, of course, is if you're set in a completely fictional world, then you can do absolutely anything you want, and it doesn't matter. You can have long-lasting changes to your world, and it is completely irrelevant to anything. No one's gonna complain about, like, well, that you can't do that, and blah blah blah. And obviously that's true. So that's an easy one. But I also feel like, unless there's a really good reason that your comic book is set on like an alien planet or something, it's kind of weird. Like, if you were just going to do, like, hey, I'm just going to do a traditional superhero comic, but I'm going to set it on an alien world. I mean, I guess you could do that, and there might be, like, some interesting things you could do with that, for sure. But it does seem a little odd. Definitely a little out there. That doesn't make it bad. It just makes it different. And then, of course, there's there's the big argument that always would happen was, between Marvel, let's say, setting their comics always in New York City or in the real world. Let's put it that, because they're not all in New York City, but a good portion of them are in New York City. And then DC having their fictional cities. So, obviously one of the big benefits of setting it in a fictional city like a Gotham City or a Metropolis, is, again, you can pretty much do whatever you want with those cities. So, I mean, we've all seen, things with Gotham City where the whole city is just cut off from the rest of the country, and for some reason they can't helicopter in people or anything like that because, I don't know, for whatever reason they just can't. You can come up with a story, like maybe like whoever cut the city off put, surface to air missile emplacements in place, so like you can't fly over, they'll shoot you down. Like that would work. We've seen things like that, and if you're gonna do something like that in the real world, it definitely makes it a little weirder. So this is what I'm saying, like, when you set your comic book, your superhero comic book, let's say, in a fictional city that is ostensibly within the real world, it definitely gives you more creative leeway to get away with things that you probably wouldn't be able to get away with otherwise. If you're setting it in the real world, there's also other considerations as well. Like, for example, talking about the Marvel setup of, it's theoretically, it is the real world that they're in, but it's just their version of the real world, which of course includes people with superpowers. One of the biggest problems that you have when you do that, though, is if something outrageous happens, if something crazy happens that just absolutely changes the face of the city or of the world or whatever, it's definitely difficult. And one of the ways they get around that sort of stuff is by introducing fake countries, Latveria or Genosha or whatever. Like, you introduce a phony country, and then you can do anything you want in that country. Like, it doesn't matter because it's not real. It could even be like, easily based on a real country, but if it's not the real country, you can pretty much do anything you want. But I'll say, like, when you do set it in the real world, again, you run the risk of how real do you make the world? In other words, like, do you have the president of the United States be the actual president of the United States, which of course will then date your story? Or do you make it a phony, generic, this is President whatever, President Thompson or whatever, that's a good generic president name right there. I tend to think you're better off doing that That's just my personal opinion. And that's what a lot of these videos are about at this point. They're just about me giving my personal opinion on these things. None of them are hard and true facts. None of them are like, you must do this. I'd never say that. You could do whatever the hell you want. It's just about opinions, and everybody's got one. You know the saying. Opinions are like elbows. Everybody's got two. I know that's not the saying. Anyway, the other thing, like an interesting example, like I have a panel up on the screen here that you'll see. It's a couple of panels, and it's from an issue of G.I. Joe that I actually coincidentally had just read, and it kind of gave me part of the inspiration to do this video, where Cobra tricks G.I. Joe into bombing a fault line with so much firepower that it causes an underground eruption that actually causes a tsunami, but also causes part of the ocean floor to now rise to the surface, and now there is a new land mass in the Gulf of Mexico, far enough away that it is technically in international waters, so it doesn't belong to any country, and it's, in that area, so it's, neighbors with Mexico, the United States, Cuba, and you see Cobra goes to all those different countries. They go to the UN, and they petition to have it named as a new country run with Cobra as the government. And in the panel that's in here, they're all laughing because G.I. Joe was fighting to try to get them off it before they got declared independent, and then they were declared, legitimate, and G.I. Joe had to walk away. So, of course, Cobra Commander and his people are laughing about it. But the whole point of my point of bringing this up is this is making a change to the world. Now, there is now a landmass in this world of G.I. Joe. Now, I know G.I. Joe is not part of the larger Marvel Comics universe, well, especially not now, but even at the time, it was kept separate. And I kind of feel like that's even better if you can set your comic book in the quote-unquote real world, but like one step over. So it's not exactly the real world, but it kind of is. It's very much like our world, but you've got the ability to make changes, to do things, and of course, you can, like with the example of Cobra Island, you can, of course, always then, later on, have the whole thing get destroyed and sunk to the bottom of the ocean, and now it's gone, and the world has gone back to normal. Like, there's things you can do with that, for sure. I always feel like that's kind of where they go, even in the main Marvel universe. But, of course, if you're running a big, big universe, and this is something that most independent creators won't have to worry about because they're not going to get to that point necessarily, because it's usually just like one creator taking care of everything. But when you have a big line of comics like Marvel or DC, one of the things that used to drive me nuts is when they would screw up, and they do this all the time now, but back in the day they were very careful about this. If something outrageous was happening in part of New York, let's say, that was altering the landscape, or if part of New York was under complete and total martial law in one comic book, let's say in The Punisher, let's say Brooklyn is under martial law in The Punisher right now. It's locked off. No one can get in and no one can get out. You're not going to also have that same month in an issue of Spider-Man, have Spider-Man going into Brooklyn and everything's normal. They were, back in the day, very careful about trying to keep that continuity going. Nowadays, they really don't seem to care about that anymore, and that's a whole topic for a whole nother video. But really, my point about this is, if you're gonna make changes, it's definitely a little more difficult to make giant changes to the real world in your comic. It's much easier to make a change to a fictional city or a fictional country or a fictional world or whatever, the case may be. However, I don't think that should stop you. I think you can have fun. It's comic books after all. And this is the thing I'm always going to come back to. I am always going to come down on the side of, it's comic books, dude. You can have fun. You can do crazy stuff in a comic book. Because it's a comic book. You can go nuts, bro. I mean, like, have a good time. Go crazy. And so, I tend to to think there's positives to both sides of this. And I know this is kind of like me saying, well, they all have their good points, and they do. That would be silly for me to say, this is the only way you could do it. But for my personal preference, I prefer things to be set in the real world, but kind of one step over. So it is the real world. It is the United States of America. It is New York City, or it's Los Angeles or Chicago or wherever it happens to be taking place. Doesn't matter. It could be in Muskogee. As long as it's taking place in a real part of the country, let's say. But I still would go one step to the side, and any people I introduce, if I were to introduce the president, it would be President Thompson or whatever, and it would be, Senator whatever, and it wouldn't be real political people. It wouldn't be anything to try and date it in that way. There's so many things that can date your comic as it is, especially with technology. And to me, I would always prefer to try to keep things timeless. Of course, that's difficult. Things are just going to be dated naturally by the vehicles, the technology, the style of clothing, the hairstyles. All that stuff is going to date your story eventually anyway, unless it literally is set on an alien world. So for me, I kind of like the one step over approach. It's the real world, but it's just a step to the side. So it's basically our world, but just a little off to one side, so you can have that freedom to play around with stuff and to do stuff like that. And it still feels real as a world, instead of just saying like, well, here's this city. It's exactly like Manhattan, but it's not Manhattan. Where's it located? Right where Manhattan would be. like that just comes across as, I always found that kind of silly. I understand it. I totally understand the reasoning behind it. But for me, I would much rather just, if you want it to be set in New York, just set it in New York, but set it in New York one step over in reality. And I'm not talking about multiverse. Maybe I'll do a video about this whole multiverse craziness that's gone on now, where everyone is just obsessed with multiverse, and it means nothing matters because you can do anything you want because it's the multiverse. Anyway, that's a whole nother topic. So let me know what you think. Do you prefer to read your comics? So specifically, I'm talking about superhero comics more than anything. Do you prefer them to be set in a real city, a real location, or would you prefer them to be set in a fictional location? And if you have any examples, because now I'm curious, if you have any examples of any that take place exclusively on it, not like Invincible where he goes to alien worlds and stuff, but one that actually takes place exclusively on an alien world, I would be interested in seeing that, because that just sounds like an interesting concept to me. So let me know down in the comments below if you've got any other topics that you want to talk about that are like comic book topics. I did the one yesterday about street level heroes and how I happen to like them the best. This one, like I said, I like comics set in the real world, but it's kind of a step over from reality. You let me know, do you prefer the Gothams and the Metropolises of the world? Or, you guys let me know in the comments below what you think. If you've got any other topics like those that you want to hear, I absolutely will be happy to address them. Let me know in the comments below. You can hit me up on Twitter at @jam_creates. You can follow me on Instagram at @jam_creates. That's mostly my art and pictures of my dog on the Instagram. So if you want to see the art I'm working on, I usually will post it up there. I'll post it on Twitter too a lot of the time, but usually Instagram. And you can follow me on TikTok as well. I do something completely different on there. But it's fun, so you might have a good time with that. It's also @jam_creates. I try to keep everything the same. I'm on all those other weird, alternate social medias as well. Things like Truth Social and Getter and Minds and all that stuff. I'm always Jam Creates or @jam_creates, usually on most platforms. So you can find me just about anywhere. And let me know. I'll talk to you guys soon. Give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you're new here. Let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Peace.